Hello everyone. So in this video I will show you how to use the single explosions feature of the simulation. To enable this feature you just have to click on this round button, then the menu will come up, and every time you click on the map an explosion will happen and it will affect the population. So the green blinking calculator button means that there are some effects to be calculated. We have to click on the button to run the effects, and we can see that it has affected the population, and we can see the casualties density on the map. So the effects that are visualized by these circles are overpressure and thermal radiation. We can change this the visualized effects with this drop-down menus depending on which effects you want to achieve, and the settings for the simulation can be seen in this menu. So if we change the yield of the explosion, of course the extent will increase, and if we change the height, the effects will also change, and you can set, let's say, an optimal height for 5 psi. Also, depending on the height of the explosion and if the fireball is touching the ground or not, there will be fallout generated or there will be no fallout generated. So for this explosion, the height is relatively high, which means there should be no fallout generated, and if we set the height to very low and put it here, then there should be fallout. Now let's calculate the effects, and we see that in this case it was very high, so there was no fallout, and in this case we can see this long tail of the fallout particles falling back to Earth. We can visualize the effects of past explosions by clicking here. Let's disable population density and casualties density. So those are all the explosions that have happened before, and we can visualize the fallout radiation. The legend to this visualizations is given here, and you can switch to fires display here. So the red zone represents highly probable fires, and orange zone represents the probable fires, which have different fatality rates. So the wind direction affecting the fallout is taken from a database which is available for 1 year for each month of the year. But if you want to have more control over the wind, you don't want to have it from the database, you can disable this feature and you can set it your own. Let's say here we have all the fallout in this direction, and if we change the wind direction, the direction of the fallout plume will change accordingly. So the different effects on the population can be set with this simulation settings menu, and here you have the settings for overpressure, thermal radiation, fallout radiation, fires, and soot generation. Here you can select the wind database, you can select one specific month, one specific day and a time of day, then you can load this database. And for other effects you can enable or disable them, and you have the curves describing the fatality rate at different effects. For thermal radiation it is depending on the yield because of the pulse duration, and there is a fatality rate prefactor which more or less accounts for how many people you expect to be exposed by the thermal radiation. Then there is a fallout radiation, there is a fatality curve again for the total cumulative dose in Röntgen, and you have the radiation protection factor groups, which basically is a spectrum of radiation protection that the population will have. So each group represents a 12.5% of the population. If you think your 12.5% of the population will be on the streets and have no protection, you can set it to 0 and so on. Then there are fires with the threshold values for probable mass fires and threshold values for highly probable mass fires, and there is a threshold in population density for the areas where mass fires will occur, and there are fatality rates for probable and highly probable mass fires. And there is soot generation, which doesn't directly affect the population, but instead it counts the soot generated by burning cities, which will then lead to climatic effects. So and here you can change how long the simulation will wait to automatically calculate the casualties. So if you don't want to click on this calculator button every time, you can just set it to, let's say, 5 seconds, and the casualties will be calculated automatically after 5 seconds after the last explosion. You can also disable or enable different effects, and let's say you don't trust this fallout simulation, you can just disable it, or you can also enable single effect just to analyze how it affects the population. So let's just enable the thermal radiation. Let's apply the settings, and if we now choose a city, let's say Berlin, and we have a single explosion over Berlin, which is actually the height. Yeah, okay, let's set some height, and let's calculate the effects. So what we'll see is that the effects extend relatively far from the ground zero, but the population, there is a lot of population left in the center of Berlin right under the explosion, because the number of people exposed to thermal radiation is actually not so high, because most people are usually somewhere sitting in buildings and are not on the street. You can also change the settings for this population density and casualties density visualization. If you go to this visualization settings, and here you can change the maximum population density that will be shown as yellow and the minimum. So if you only want to, let's say you only want to show areas which will be affected by mass fires at 3,500 people per square kilometer, you can set it like this. Yeah. So now all the yellow areas would be affected by mass fires if the thermal radiation threshold is achieved. And you can do the same for casualties density. And you can also change the transparency if you want to create some kind of visualization of this area and you want to see through the effects well. So this is how you use the single explosion feature of the simulation. I will go into more details on the visualization settings in another video. Thank you for your attention.